"Thank you," said Barnabas, Duke of Grendale, blotting the last of the subscription book without lifting his head. "Miss, forgive me." "Miss what?" He had asked her the same question 20 minutes earlier, at the beginning of the interview, and had received a perfectly clear answer, and had let it go straight through him the way a man lets go of the weather. There was a small pause, and the woman on the other side of the desk drew her gloves through her fingers and said, "It does not signify, Your Grace." Then she curtsied and took up the ledger and went out, and the door closed behind her with great gentleness, and he thought nothing of it at all, nothing whatever, for 11 weeks. She had come 3 times. He recalled that much afterwards, when recalling had become the whole business of his life. The first time she had brought the winter subscription book for his signature, and he had signed it in the middle of a dispute with his agent about drainage and had never once looked up. The second time she had brought the coal accounts, and he had been civil, and had said something about the excellence of the arrangement, and had not troubled to notice that the arrangement was entirely her own and had been for 6 years. The third time she had brought the blanket list and a request for the loan of the tithe barn for the Michaelmas supper, and he had granted it and asked her name twice. She was, he would have said, a person who came about the fund, grey pelisse, good handwriting, a quiet voice that did not waste his time. That was the sum of what the Duke of Grendale knew about her, and he had thought it enough, because it had never in his life occurred to him that it was possible to be a man of 40 and know nothing about anybody. The report's going to come in another hand in October. He noticed it because the new hand was worse, cramped, with a fussy loop on the capitals, and because the figures did not tell him anything. The old reports had notes in the margins: chimney at Bell Row wants sweeping before frost. Old Marbury will not ask, so send. The new reports had columns and nothing else. Bell writes for the fund now, his agent said when he asked. Miss Kettering sends by him. Kettering, he thought. Yes, that was it. He saw her in November at the Assembly Rooms at Hallowby, and she was standing by the window with 2 other women, and she was laughing, and it was the first time it had ever entered his head that she might be a person who laughed. He crossed the room to her, out of some vague sense of civility owed, and she curtsied and said, "Your Grace," and asked after his mother's health and answered his 3 questions in 11 words altogether, and then the music began and she was gone. She had not been rude. That was the extraordinary part. There was not one atom of rudeness in her from that day to the end of the year. She simply removed herself from his notice, entirely and permanently, with the perfect courtesy of a woman closing a door in her own house. He offered £100 to the fund in December, and the acknowledgement came back through the vicar. He asked, at the vestry meeting, whether Miss Kettering would attend, and was told she had sent her regrets. He passed her on the Harlowby Road in his carriage, and she stepped aside into the wet grass and inclined her head to the crest on the door, and not to the man behind the window, and he sat back against the leather and found that his face was hot. By the end of January it had become the only thing he thought about. He did not understand it at first, and being a man who preferred his own understanding, he told himself several convenient things: that the fund was suffering, that the woman was proud, that there had been some slight from the housekeeper. He went so far as to send for Mrs. Ellery and inquire whether Miss Kettering had ever been kept waiting in the hall, and Mrs. Ellery, who had been at Grendale 31 years, said, "Only the usual, Your Grace," in a tone that stayed with him for a week. He went to the vicar in February, because he had run out of everything else. "She has not resigned," Mr. Dunnage said, filling his pipe with maddening slowness. "She does the work still. She does more of it than she ever did. She only sends Vel up to the house." "Why?" The vicar looked at him for a while. "I could not say, Your Grace. You could say. You are simply weighing whether to. That is true." Mr. Dunnage lit his pipe. "Then I will say this much, and no more, for she would take it very ill of me. Miss Kettering has kept that fund since she was 19 years of age. She has been to the great house perhaps 40 times in 6 years, and I do not believe that in all those 40 times any person in it ever once asked her to sit down." Grendale went home the long way. He did the thing that a man of his sort does when he has been shown a wound. He tried to buy a bandage. He wrote a draft on his London bank for £200 and directed that it be entered in the subscription book in the name of Miss Kettering. And he sent his own carriage down to the little house behind the churchyard on a Thursday, with a note requesting the pleasure of her company at dinner at Grendale. The carriage came back empty. So did the draft. Her note was 4 lines, and he read it so often that winter that he could have written it out in his sleep. Your Grace. The fund cannot accept a subscription entered in my name, since the money is not mine and the name is not the fund's. I have therefore entered it as anonymous, which I hope will not offend you. As for the carriage, I am very sensible of the honour, but I am not to be sent for. A subscription is not an apology, and I find I no longer know what to do with attention that arrives in a vehicle. D. Kettering. He sat with it in the library until the fire went out. D. He did not know what the D stood for. He had been given it once, in this room across this desk, and he had asked for it a second time and been told, quite rightly, that it did not signify, and the plain unbearable fact was that he had spent 40 years being handed people's names and putting them down unopened, like letters from someone he did not intend to answer. The next morning he sent for the steward's book, the great one, with every holding and every cottage on the Grendale land written in it, and he opened it at the first page, and he began. It took him from February to Michaelmas, and it was the hardest work he had ever done, and none of it was work that anybody could see. There were 209 souls on the Grendale land. He walked to them. He got names wrong and was corrected and wrote the corrections down, and was laughed at behind hedges and deserved it. He learned that the Bell Row chimneys had wanted sweeping for 3 winters. He learned that his own butler, Sallows, who had stood behind his chair for 19 years, was christened Wilfrid, and that his wife was dead, and that he had not been asked for leave to attend the funeral because he had not thought a butler might ask. Grendale went upstairs after that particular conversation and stood at his window for a long time without seeing anything at all, and he learned her. He did not ask her. He had forfeited asking. He went at it sideways through the old subscription books, which she had kept since she was 19 in a clear upright hand, with those small merciful notes in the margins, through Mrs. Ellery, through the sexton, through the parish register, where a single line in the Fever told him more than any of them. Josiah Kettering, physician of Grendale. Buried the 9th of April. He had died of the fever he took nursing the Grendale tenants through the bad spring, going from cottage to cottage on foot for 11 weeks, because the great house had sent no help and no money, and so far as any book in that house recorded, no letter. He had left a widow and 1 daughter of 17. The widow had lived 4 more years. The daughter had taken over the coal fund at 19 because there was nobody else, and had come up to the great house 40 times in 6 years, and had never once been asked to sit down, and had never once mentioned her father's name to the son of the man who had let him die unthanked. Barnabas, Duke of Grendale, closed the register in the vestry and put his hand over his mouth and stood there until he could trust himself to walk out past the sexton. The Michaelmas supper was held in the Tither barn, as it had been every year for a century, with the lanterns strung along the beams and the trestles laid end to end and the whole parish in it, and the Duke of Grendale stood up at the head of the barn with no paper in his hand. He did not make a speech. He had tried 3 and burned all 3. He said good evening to Wilfrid Sallows by name. He said good evening to Mrs. Ellery, and to Tom Marbury and his mother Susan Marbury of Bell Row, and to the Feltos, all 7 of them, and he named the 7. He went down the length of that barn naming people, the shepherd, the shepherd's brother, the girl who did the dairy, the man who had mended the church clock for nothing 3 years running, 40 of them 50, and got 2 wrong and stopped and corrected himself out loud. And the barn had gone so quiet that the lanterns could be heard creaking on their wires. And then he said, Josiah Kettering, physician of this parish, who walked from door to door of my father's land through 11 weeks of the fever year and died of it, and whose name is not cut on any stone of my house, and will be before the winter. He looked down the barn, at the 3rd trestle from the end, where a woman in a grey pelisse was sitting very still with her hands in her lap. I am ashamed to tell you that, until the spring, I did not know it. I have been the master of this place for 11 years, and I did not know the name of the man who saved it. Nobody applauded. It was not that sort of silence. After a moment the fiddler began, because he was a sensible man, and the trestles were pushed back, and Grendale went into the yard, because he could not stay. He came to the little house behind the churchyard the following evening with a plain calf-bound notebook under his arm. She opened the door herself. She did not ask him in. "I have not come to be asked in," he said. "I have come to give you this, and to go." She turned it over in her hands. "What is it?" "Every name on the Grendale land. 209 of them in my own hand, with what I know of each. I began it in February." He found he could not look at her, and made himself. "Yours is on the first page." She opened it there in the doorway with the lamp behind her. He knew what was written on that page, having written it in 11 separate installments over 7 months. Each entry added the day he learned it. Miss Dorothea Kettering, of the house behind the churchyard. Secretary to the Coal and Blanket Fund these 6 years unpaid, and its founder in all but name. Takes her tea without sugar, left-handed, and hides it. Plays the pianoforte very well and will not play when asked, but plays when the room is talking. Walked to Harlowby and back in the January of the hard frost with the subscription money in her boot. Was told once by a man too idle to listen that her name did not signify. Daughter of Josiah Kettering, who is owed more by this house than this house can pay. She read it twice. He watched her read it twice. "You have written down what I take in my tea," she said at last, and her voice was not steady. "I have written down everything I could come at without asking you," he said, "because I had given up the right to ask you anything, and I did not choose to spend it on my own comfort. Your Grace, let me finish, and then I will go, and you need never receive me again." He took off his hat, which he should have done at the gate. "I did not stop coming to you because you were proud, Miss Kettering. You stopped coming to me, and you were right to, and I have had 8 months to understand why, and I believe I do. You did not withdraw to punish me. You withdrew because you had spent 6 years being useful to a house that did not know you existed, and one day you found you had come to the end of what a person can spend." He put the hat back on. "I am not asking for anything. The notebook is not a bargain. It is a debt written down. I ask only that when I speak to you, you look at me, because I have discovered that I would rather be looked at by you than by anybody in England." Dorothea Kettering stood in her doorway with the lamp behind her and the notebook open in her hands, and did not say anything for so long that he had turned to go. "Your Grace." He stopped on the path. "You may come on Tuesday," she said, "at 4. There is no sugar in this house, so you will have to take it as I do." He came on the Tuesday, and on a great many Tuesdays after it, and he sat in a small parlour with a low ceiling and drank bitter tea and learned that she was funny, properly funny, dry as a bone, and that she could not abide sentimental verse, and that she had opinions about drainage which were better than his agent's. He mended the Bell-Row chimneys. She made him carry the blankets himself, in the rain, and did not spare him. Her father's name was cut into the stone of the north wall of the chapel at Grendale in December, with the fever year under it, and she stood beside him while the mason worked, and neither of them said a word. He asked her in the spring, in the churchyard lane, with the blackthorn out. "Tell me your name," he said. She looked up at him with the beginning of that dry look. "You know my name. You have written it in a book." "I know it. I want it given to me." His voice was not quite level. "I had it twice, and I dropped it twice, and I should like, if you will let me, to be told it once more by the only person entitled to give it, and I promise you on everything I have that I will not put it down again." And Dorothea Kettering, who had decided one November afternoon that she would not remind him a third time, took his hand in the lane and reminded him. He never did put it down. He says it a dozen times a day at Grendale now, to her face and behind her back, and to 209 people who all know it perfectly well, and the notebook, much worn, lives in the drawer of her writing desk, where it has been added to every year since in 2 different hands.